Now, in the fragile world of the Bigfoot believer, our guest tonight is a one-man wrecking machine, owner of BigFoot Books and founding member of the Bluff Creek Project. He has become a bit of a magnet for all things Sasquatch related. He's attracting fans, media personalities, and researchers alike to his bookstore in Willow Creek, California. He's also the founder of the Coalition for Critical Thinking and Bigfoot Research, a Facebook group that's a shark tank of skeptics, researchers, and the just plain curious, all led by their commander in critical thinking, our guest tonight, Mr. Steven Streufert. Steve, you there, buddy?
Yeah. Hello.
How you doing, Moss?
Got me coming through clear.
Excellent. Yes. How are things up in Willow Creek?
Very slow, very pandemic-y still.
Yeah.
Luckily, we've got the Native Americans rebelling against the county government, and they're set to provide us with vaccines out here. Even though the county claims to be all out of vaccines.
Why don't you bring us up to speed? I mean, I haven't seen that on the news back here on the East Coast. Why don't you bring everybody up to speed? What's going on?
They're all out of vaccines, so the native tribe got a hold of a whole bunch, and they're vaccinating all comers who are locals to our mountain communities out here.
Have you gotten it?
No, not yet. No.
I haven't gotten it yet.
One of the main things we want to try to do is have a normal year this year, with tourism and Bigfoot hunters and production crews and all the other things that normally show up here in Willow Creek. But, it's not looking like that right now. If I look out on the road out there, there's nobody. It's like a ghost town.
Now, what is your season? What is the typical season when the snow melts and you've got time and you've got the roads are cleared for people to start coming up there? Is it now?
Yeah, well, it starts usually right about now when we start having sunny weather and it gets to be kind of nice out. And, the high mountain passes like Bluff Creek are still snowed over probably and are fully closed by the government. But, they start opening up in May, usually. That's our season, May to October. And the rest of the year is just completely dead. We also are on a marijuana economy out here, a lot of us. So not me, but our community is. So unless you're growing indoor, and that's not what we're known for out here. They want to grow from the warmest possible early date until October when you harvest. Once it starts getting cold, and that's our season there. And those people all just leave. I mean, most of them do, and that includes out of town workers and property owners and grow up people in general, and the tourists and the Bigfoot hunters. I mean. Willow Creek goes from like boom to bust really quickly. Yeah.
Now you own BigFoot Books. For people that don't know, you're the owner and operator of BigFoot Books in Willow Creek, California. Real quick, if you want to run us through how long you've had the shop. I know a lot of people think that it's BigFoot Books. It's just nothing but books on Bigfoot maps and souvenirs, but it's not like that at all. If you want to just give us a quick ad for the shop, let us know what BigFoot Books is all about.
Yeah, well, it's a general purpose bookstore. That's how I started doing it. All topics except for the ones that I think are really bad. I even have romance novels in here, so you can see I'm pretty tolerant of topics. But yeah, I tend to these days specialize more because people don't really need to buy books in physical form anymore. So what they really want is the rare items, things that they can't just get from Google Books or Kindle or whatever. So yeah, Bigfoot. I started out the store with no Bigfoot books, not any Bigfoot titles whatsoever. I just called the store Bigfoot Books because it's local interest, and from that point on, I pretty much had to stock Bigfoot books because people kept asking for them. You know, they come in here and they're looking all over like, well, where do I find all the Bigfoot tourism crap? You know, and pretty much there isn't much anymore. You know, there used to be Bigfoot gift shops all over the place, but a lot of the locals just gave up on Bigfoot, you know, especially when the marijuana money came in here. They didn't need Bigfoot anymore. You know, they had a new cash cow, and a lot of those Bigfoot curio shops and stuff closed up. So it's harder to get like a coffee mug or a shot glass or a T-shirt or postcards. Yeah, I mean, when I moved here in 2001, every store had something Bigfooty. The grocery store even had Bigfoot on the grocery sacks, you know, a shopping cart with a mama Bigfoot. I'd show you, but I'd have to move the phone. There's mama Bigfoot pushing the cart, and there's a little baby Sasquatch in the seat of the cart, you know.
Well,
that
Bigfoot,
kind of stuff is everywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, along with logging, mining, and like you said, you mentioned earlier, the Native American history, the Bigfoot myth is kind of embedded in the culture up there, right? I mean, it's probably much more embedded than the average person would think, right? Am I right or am I wrong?
It depends what you define as Bigfoot. This is a topic that could go on for hours. But the native people had the Bigfoot entity, whatever it is, you know, in their culture since time immemorial. And it really sure does seem to have come over from the East, not just as a possible animal, but as a culture as well. They probably had the same myths and legends and beliefs about Bigfoot that the Himalayan people have about Yetis or whatever you call them. So, I mean, whether it's a cultural thing or whether it's an animal, you know, it seems to have existed since the earliest times. And I mean, that would be going back, you know, to the beginning of time as far as a lot of the native cultures identify it. But, you know, as far as modern, you know, anthropology or paleontology, you're talking about tens of thousands of years going back. But, you know, in the modern white man culture, it's, you know, something that really started up in like the 1950s here. Before that time, when Willow Creek became famous, you know, for its footprint track finds, and in 1958 at Bluff Creek, and then later the 1967, you know, Patterson film. Bigfoot was just kind of a thing that lurked in the background. Not that many people really talked about it, and the native people didn't want to talk about it. That's one of the things that they didn't share very much with the anthropologists, at least not directly, or you know, like they might have a story about an ogre woman who abducts children and stuff, but is that really a Bigfoot? You have to ask yourself these questions, because like if you look at like Kathy Strain's you know, Cannibals, Giants, Monsters book, it's a great collection of anthropological literature, mostly, you know, public domain stuff, not current day Bigfoot studies, but, you know, the native cultures as they were found by the earliest competent anthropologists at the turn of the 20th century, you know. So that they caught the very, very end of the traditional era, which was still left out here in the early 1900s, late 1800s, you know, before, you know, the frontier really got shut down and the so-called Indian wars were ended, you know, in the saddest of ways. But, you know, out here, the cultures were still pretty vibrant, and they were able to escape a lot of the crushing effects that you might have found in other areas where they were just wholesale thrown off their land, you know. Like out here, they could take away your kid, right, and put him in or her in a boarding school with a white culture only education and no language permitted except for English. But, you know, they could escape and, you know, go through the canyons, you know, up north 50, 60 miles, and you get back in your home territory again. So these were, you know, these people knew their land, and better than the white man did. So,
Right. Yeah, of
so,
course.
the Bigfoot thing existed for them way back, but that was just one of the peculiar entities associated with the forest and with the spirit world. So it is not the same thing that David Paulides put in his book in 2008, or that we see on TV.
Right.
Our version of Bigfoot now is very different from most of what the native people seem to have thought about it back then.
I think that's a very
Granted,
good point. That's a very good point to make, Stephen. And it's actually it's shedding a lot of light for me. Is up to what 1958 or whatever it is when white man gentrified Bigfoot, the Bigfoot myth, or the modern Bigfoot myth as a lot of people know it. Unfortunately, now today is, like you said, the wild man or the hairy man or the myths of the Hoopa Indians and the other Indians. I don't want to sound ignorant here, but I probably will come off that way. But it's not the same thing. It's kind of where there's we've taken it, and I think we've made a kind of over embellished the current modern Bigfoot myth as compared to the Indian tales of long ago.
Yeah, and it's changed with time, and if you look at the old accounts, like pick up a good book like the Historical Bigfoot, that's what it's called. That is a book that came out with a new edition. It went from the 200 something pages of the first edition to like 1,000 pages.
Now, who wrote that book?
Chad Ament, I think is how you say his name. Mm-hmm. He's a cryptozoological writer of good intelligence, not very well known though, but that book is like 1,000 pages long now. he redid it, and these are all the old accounts, pretty much what you would call pre-internet, pre-John Green, before the modern times of discovery, so-called Bigfoot culture. And if you look at these old stories, they're endless. A lot of them, of course, being fairly ludicrous, humorous stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them were newspaper articles that would spread from one newspaper to the other and get more and more crazy as they went, right? Because the editors are trying to sell newspapers, just like these hucksters on television are these days trying to sell you their fake reality TV.
Right.
That horrible new TV show which
We've
I
got a
hope
lot
we
of
can talk
time to
about
cover
later.
that. We got a lot of time. We got a lot of time to cover Sergeant Russell Cord and the magical myth of Bigfoot when it comes to Discovery Plus. Yes.
Yeah. But let me just say, like, my point without the rambling was
no, go on. We got plenty of time.
Back then, they didn't really know what to call it. As you've surely seen, like every tribal group culture had its own names for these things, or for the legend, and they had versions of it that were different from each other. They weren't all the same. They're not all the same people. They had different languages. They had different times they migrated around the country, different waves of people coming from different parts of the other world, the old world. So they may have shared these things. Like around here, you have the Karuks, the Yurok, and the Hoopa, the three main tribes out here in the mountains, and they all share the similar view of Bigfoot. They've all kind of intermarried, shared, especially when the populations might have gotten down low. You had to look outside your family for a mate, right? So they'd have ritual ceremonies and people would meet each other that way. But so the culture spread to each other. They still have different names for it. They still have different versions of it. If you get to know anybody who practices the traditional cultures more than the popular culture, you'll get right down to it. That Bigfoot is not what you see on TV. It's something different. It can take us all this woo stuff, right? The stuff that's been co-opted by the New Age white people now. A lot of it comes from Native American culture, but what they do is they deracinate it. They pull it up out of the ground from its roots, and they stick these things into the New Age model. And they try to make it all work for them, not realizing that they've left behind the culture that supported that thing to grow and for it to make sense. So you've got a bunch of modern white people faking it, pretending to have these mystical experiences in this culture, but actually they're really far distant from it.
Now, real quick, I just want to interject real quick. I'm sorry, Stephen. The book that you were talking about, do you know I'm getting a lot of hits for people trying to figure out what the name of the book was? The 1,000-pager, you said.
Just look it up. It's available online. I see that in the chat room now.
Yeah, what was the name of it?
It's called The Historical Bigfoot.
The Historical Bigfoot. There you go. Get
the new one with the blue cover, not the first edition with the yellow cover, unless you just want a short version, because the new one is much more serious. And anyway, the thing is, they didn't know what to call this, so you had all these native names, and then you had all these regional names like booger and whatnot that you still hear today, wood booger and squatch and Sasquatch and Bigfoot and of course the more traditional ones. It could go on forever, blending these with other creatures like the Wendigo and whatnot. The monsters that you had roaming around. Whether they're all the same beast or not is a good question. But in a lot of these early stories, you're going to hear people talking about escaped apes that escaped from circuses.
Yes, the old circus train.
You're going to hear a lot about crazy people. You're going to hear stories that are supposed to be Bigfoot, but they're wearing clothes. They're carrying a club. There's stories from around here. What they called the Oma, was not necessarily Bigfoot. It lived in a cave. It wore clothes. It had medicine pouch that it usually wore around its neck. There was not just one of them. There was a tribe of these, and they were wild people, or what other tribal groups call stick Indians, right? Sometimes around here they'd call them the Injun Devil, and some people around here think that the Injun Devil is actually just a human shaman who is turned to the dark side, kind of like the bear shamans who would fight a bear and then wear its hide, like over their head, even so, like they'd live like a bear, and you could have the same effect like the skinwalkers do in the other parts of the country. But whether these are all Bigfoots or not, you really have to always ask yourself, and you're basically dealing with folklore, not not exactly like natural history or anthropology.
Right.
And when you're dealing with folklore, this ogre who puts a basket on her back and takes children out into the woods and eats them. It sounds just like, Hansel and Gretel or something. And you can't just assume from that, that it's all Bigfoot, it's all the same wood woes or whatever.
Right.
You have to look at each story and each culture independently of each other as much as you can, to try and understand it. It doesn't do much good to just put everything in a blender and hit, whirl, and it all just blurs into one mush. You can't have knowledge of anything without a particular referent point. You have to say, this is a fact, this is a fact. Here's instances of these facts. Here's where they came from. Here's where they went. Here's what these facts influenced in the development of culture and knowledge and science and whatnot. But once you put it all in a blender, you just get a mush like Matthew Johnson or Tom Cantrell are putting out there.
Right.
These pseudo-native, mystical hodgepodge, what I call syncretic religions. They're like a new age cult, but But you got to be careful. If you say syncretic, they're not going to understand what that word is. They're not going to go and look it up in a dictionary. They're going to get mad, and then they're going to go tell all their friends that you called them synthetic. And I tried to explain this to Arla Williams. I didn't call you a synthetic Indian. Those weren't my words. I didn't insult your elders, which is what she said I did. All I said is that like if you look at a lot of the native culture in the modern world, it's been modernized. It is developed over time, just like any culture does. And there are syncretic New Age forms of Native American culture now that are quite different from what you might read in a book like Kathy Strain's book.
Right.
And that's the point I was trying to make. That she's such an anti-intellectual, emotional mess that I not only could I not make the point after typing out pages of messages to her, that she then, despite my pages of messages to her, she went and told all of her friends, oh, this guy Steve, he hates Indians, and well, no, I don't. I'm trying to defend their cultural distinctness and their individuality from the co-option of people like her,
Right.
like her. She's one of those people who's probably 100% white, or maybe like very small bit of Cherokee in her.
Mm-hmm.
But what she's done is made up stories of how she supposedly had this secret grandmother who taught her all the Indian ways, and how she saw Bigfoot when she was a little kid and stuff. I mean, I hate to say it, but you have to be really suspicious of people like that, because they're trying to sell you something usually, or this is a part of their identity that makes them feel better. It's not really a true part of a lot of their identities.
Well, that's the problem. That's the huge problem with today, with the we'll just call it the Bigfoot community today, especially with the internet, and that's what makes I'm always been a fan. I've been a fan, not always, but I'd say for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been a member of your Facebook group, which is the Coalition for Critical Thinking and Bigfoot Research. And I've known that you've said on several occasions that you are not in this to make friends. At some time you became disillusioned with the whole Bigfoot research thing, and you formed the coalition. And I'd like to, if anybody's spent any time at all in that group, it's abundantly clear that you're not in there to influence friends and run for office. You're in there to call it like you see it, and I think that's refreshing. But it also ruffles a hell of a lot of fucking feathers, man. There's a lot of people that get ass hurt because you're not in there to you're in there to cultivate critical opinions and real thought, and not to give constant affirmation to people when everything they see is Bigfoot. So what led you to bringing up or creating the coalition?
Yeah, I guess that's a good segue, because it really was related to this dealings I had in 2010 with people like Arla Williams and Tom Cantrell, who were the real the Pope, and what do they call? They actually called themselves this: the Pope and Queen of the Forest, or whatever. They had they wanted to be like the ambassadors for the Bigfoot forest people.
Self-appointed, of course, right?
Sort of, but also by their friends, like just being admired by everybody, being willing to believe, right? Like how does a narcissistic personality get started on this Bigfoot stuff? Well, you can see it very clearly in someone like Matthew Johnson. He was going about his life. He's basically a failed basketball player and a small town Christian psychologist from a Christian university that didn't have the highest ranking. So, I mean, maybe it just wasn't enough for him. But at one time in his life, there's this crucial point, usually around age, right? When somebody starts getting to that point where, you buy a sports car, or, have an affair, cheat on your spouse or whatever, he had a Bigfoot encounter. And this was like obviously, uh, part of a deeper psychological process for him. But once he started getting all that attention for it, that made it feel important, right?
Of course,
So
yeah.
that started in the year 2000 or whatever, and by 2010, 2012, he had faded into the background. He didn't have enough people who really uh, admired him enough to make it feel worthwhile for him. So I mean, I think what he really wanted was to be admired like a prophet. And I got this in my head, like he's turning to the woo woo side by being a habituator. Like that used to be considered woo woo, that
Right.
you could befriend a Sasquatch and they'd come back and talk with you and stuff for on a daily basis with some of these people. Some of these people are putting out like Thanksgiving meals for Bigfoot, and like that used to be super weird. But now, like Johnson, he kind of fished around in the background of the weirdo Sasquatch culture, and he pulled a little from Kiwoni and a little from John Eric Beckjord and a little from the native traditions and a little from quantum physics and people like Henry Franzoni and Tom Powell, who believe in the magical reality stuff. I mean,
Right.
even Michael Merchant, he's like a biologist. He's sort of into this woo-woo stuff. But I mean, that's as far as I'm concerned, that's cool as long as you don't become a toxic, narcissistic cult leader. Like
Right.
that is what Matthew Johnson is right now, in my opinion. But I mean, you can watch it play out. Who knows if they're going to go the same way as Heaven's Gate? But I mean, it sure looks like Heaven's Gate to me. And like I say all this kind of stuff because I have a background in having explored the same stuff. And I was in a theosophy group that was sort of like a cult and practiced, esoteric philosophies for a good long period of time. As far as other things, I was raised Christian, so I mean that to me is kind of a cult too. In my own humble view of this, it's a religion that's not exactly rational. So at some point, I got really discouraged by all the claims of the occult, and
Mm-hmm.
I decided, after a real hard time where the group I was in basically disintegrated, we were all just kind of left stranded, high and holy in the middle of uh, great pain. So, I just went back to Santa Barbara and watched a lot of Star Trek with my old friend from high school. And I don't know what happened. Something happened when we were joking around about logic and stuff. Like Spock, I guess, had this like influence on me.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy that my old friend, he's a scientist. Went to Harvard, PhD. So we sat around and talked about all this stuff. Like, I spent like almost 2 years down there recovering from the cult process that I had been in,
You mean
and
deprogrammed?
deprogramming myself.
Yes, of course. Self.
And so I deprogrammed myself of everything. Like from the very beginning, I questioned the whole package. I mean, including human existence at the most basic level, like
Mm-hmm.
all culture, all religion, all philosophy. Uh, and I reconstructed not a belief system, but more of a methodology that helps to analyze anything in life, whether it's Bigfoot or whether it's the news or whether it's any scientific article or book that I get in my store here. I have to be able to deal with all forms of knowledge, and that's what I try to do. I'm not just studying Bigfoot, like
Right.
Bigfoot
Right.
is one of the parts of the world that I'm curious about, and especially because of the window that it opens to these kinds of belief systems, like the Arla Williams, Tom Cantrell, mind speak. Bigfoot is my guru kind of thing that they say. The they actually have a teacher with a capital T, you know.
Right. Well, there's
I
so
mean,
much
that's what
infighting.
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
There's so much infighting with a lot of the Facebook groups and a lot of the groups in general. I'm not just saying Facebook groups, but Bigfoot groups in general. There's a lot of tick for tack, a lot of he said, she said, juvenile crap that I don't think A is tolerated or B is presented on the coalition group site, which seems to me is very refreshing. And it's also been, I think, to me, and this is again is in my humble opinion, is it's probably one of the most consistent, if not the most consistent, critical place online where one can hope to present evidence. I don't know if anybody has presented anything on there that's made you think of stuff, but I mean, why do you think all these groups are at each other's fucking throats all the time? Is it just being juvenile, or just being naive to the fact of they're Bigfoot fans and they're not really researchers?
Well, they maybe are very caught up in the emotions of a belief system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess I didn't really answer the question about the coalition group yet. So,
oh no, I'm still getting to it. I'm just I was just kind of jumping that. I wanted to jump that
but
in there.
You're asking it again in a different way. Like, the coalition group was founded because the other groups, they wouldn't tolerate any serious discussion about the Bigfoot topic at all if it were dealing with rational skeptical methods and real science. If you said like Bigfoot is a primate, they'd all have an argument about well, is Bigfoot an animal or a person? And then I'd have to say, well, Bigfoot is, if Bigfoot exists, first off, start that sentence with the proper qualifier. If Bigfoot exists, then it would appear to be a primate, and well, humans are primates, and then they say back at you, well, I'm not any kind of goddamn ape, well, God didn't make me from an ape, a monkey. That whole creationist thing kicks in, and then pretty soon that's what your argument is about, and then the admin comes around and throws you out of the group. And so I just, it happened to me so many times, and I wasn't even arguing with people. I was being really nice and just saying, saying like, well, science says that humans are primates, like you can't just go and like make up your own reality and say, well, we're not primates, we're like spirits in the material world or whatever.
It's like, well, okay, it's because they said so. They get very upset. Yes.
That's a nice belief system. I mean, it certainly feels that way to be human, that you're a mind that's sort of separate from physical reality, and you have like an immortal life that seems to go on forever. How could you just die and cease to exist, right? All these things have troubled us since the very beginnings of our species. So it's certainly not going to be solved by Matthew Johnson, by him bringing 267,000 Bigfoot spirits through the portal from another planetary system that they opened with some Radio Shack Tesla device that his friend designed by watching a YouTube video. And he run it off of car batteries out of the back of his pickup truck in some old logging road in Oregon. I mean, why does this even happen? But, like we used to get shocked when there was like one person who said something about a blob squatch or a stick structure or a cloaked Bigfoot that you couldn't even see, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
Like I still have all these files from 2010 when I was friends with Autumn Williams. Then not so much now because she sort of retired from the whole thing, backed way off of Bigfoot, but I always respect her, but some of her friends in the habituation crowd are a little bit out there. And she introduced me to these groups that these people were in, and I guess this was the early days of Facebook taking over the Bigfoot culture, right? And so to me, I was like, what in the world is this? And it was like a group of maybe like 200 people, and they were all just sharing this stuff all day long of like, Bigfoot is in my yard right now, he's eating pizza or whatever. It's like, seriously. I mean, I thought Bigfoot was more like John Green and Renee Hinton waiting around for the report to come in, like, and then driving off real fast, from Canada all the way down to Northern California to investigate like one frickin' report,
And to me, that's
like
when
every day.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's when the before the whole internet stuff got cluttered, the waters got very muddied. Was you had Tom Green, you had Renee DeHinden and John Green and those guys and Grover Krantz, the real boots on the ground type of guys. And I think a lot of people are armchair Squatch. I call them Bigfoot fans. I don't think they're researchers. I think they're more of a fan club. And they like to thank everybody and not piss anybody off and never say, wow, that doesn't look like shit. It looks like a blurry nothing. They'd rather pat the person on the back and give them a thumbs up on the internet rather than discuss anything seriously. And that's, to me, it's just a tragic waste of time. But people need to live, I guess, like that. I don't know why they feel the need. Mike, do you have any thoughts on that at all? Mike, you've been awful quiet.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Steve, just regarding what you guys were talking about before about just the infighting in the different groups. I wanted to go back to that real quickly.
Yeah.
I think what happens with a lot of these groups, and just I'd be really interested in your input on this, Steve. What happens? I think these people essentially fall into echo chambers, and they're pretty much driven by the mentality of wanting to believe something is real more than thinking that something's actually is real. I read this article. It was in, I think, the Guardian or something. Guardian or one of those sites. And one of the things that said was, like these echo chambers, they may be comforting, but what they ultimately do, and you could see this a lot, I think in a lot of these groups, among this type of community, they ultimately lock us into this sort of perpetual tribalism. And what they do is they wind up doing a lot of perceptive damage to our our general understanding of things. So, in essence, what they inadvertently wind up doing to us is limit, our, one's freedom and ability to learn and tolerate differences of opinion. And I think this is especially prevalent on sites and apps with a lot of, customization qualities pertaining to your interests, like Facebook, for example. With those settings, people create their own echo chambers. And what happens, like I've had Facebook over 10 years. What happens is people pretty much ferment in these echo chambers, and as a result, when they hear any kind of contradictory view, they don't know how to adequately handle those instances where their views are to some degree being challenged. And then something I could totally relate to too. I'll give you a quick anecdote. Outside of the CARC in this field, I'm a big hockey writer. About 2 summers ago, I wrote this article on this player that the team I covered was supposedly interested in. I wrote this, the whole fan base wanted wanted to go after this guy. I wrote an article on why they shouldn't trade for this guy, and I published that article. I got trashed. I had people messaging me personally, adding me on Twitter, saying just horrible things to me, like this article's trash, you're a horrible writer, get off Twitter, blah blah blah. And I'm thinking to myself, this is literally all because I challenge the perceived mainstream consensus on this, particular issue. So, it seems like in most cases, people, when, they're confronted with issues that they've been conditioned, to believe in for such a long time, whenever those views are challenged, it seems like in a lot of cases, they're conditioned to unconsciously resort to ad hominem. And just, for people who don't know what that is, it's like an instance where in an argument, someone attacks the person they're arguing against rather than the actual argument itself. So my question for you, Steve, is whenever you interact with these triggered individuals whose, echo chambers you dare, rattle by having, an objective, unconventional outlook on something, are these people more interested in actually having an actual structured, engaging discussion with you on why something may or may not be? Or do they just tend to attack you personally?
Oh yeah, it's always personal attacks because that's all they can attack. I'm not 99% of the time. I'm not even thinking of or talking about myself or my personal beliefs. You know, and what you say, it works like this. They say something about Bigfoot. I say Bigfoot is a primate. If Bigfoot exists, Bigfoot is a primate. Well, um, and then they get mad and they you're just some blah 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 blah
We
you blah
hate
blah
you.
blah 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 blah. And then 5 minutes later is I'm going to come to your store and beat you up with a gang of thugs with baseball bats. And the kind of death threat like that, I get them all the time. And it's like why? Because I questioned this guy's 25-foot Bigfoot that was obviously just shadows in the trees and some logs and leaves, right? He said it was 25 feet tall and it would like abduct women and take them out in the woods. And he's like, come on, obviously, like, this is not that unusual anymore in the Bigfoot world. That the people to have these beliefs is normal now.
Well,
And
you've been attacked,
they
right?
can they can find that in their echo chamber on Facebook, just like we've seen the QAnon belief systems. And well, frankly, left or right, religious or skeptical, you can find your place, right? Your place where you feel comfortable, and maybe it makes you feel special. It's like you see a lot of people who defend like what are, to me, blatant hoaxers, right? Like, so why is somebody so defensive of Todd Standing when we all know that Todd Standing is a hoaxer? Like, I mean, I've been studying this thing since like 1999, and I remember when Todd Standing first came on the freaking Coast to Coast show, and he was so full of it, it was just seeping out of my speaker, but I couldn't stop listening. I thought, oh, great, this is the way it's going. This is the way that it's gonna go, and it sure enough has. So the social media allows for people like Todd Standing to have this tremendous effect on somebody who's like living a sad and lonely life in wherever they happen to be, Bakersfield or Oklahoma or whatever, and maybe they're just a fan of Bigfoot, watching TV shows, and then the next thing you know, they're friends with Todd Standing. So, like, that's great. They feel so special, and they're in a group where they discuss things on a daily basis, and there's nobody left in the group to question them because it's a cult. Basically, Bigfoot belief is a cult. It may not, drink Kool-Aid, but I mean, it's heading that way in some branches of it. The thing is, uh, that if you can't have a rational, objective discussion about whether something is true or not, then you've lost all mooring, you've lost all hook and anchor into reality. And not only that, you've lost the means of discovering reality, which is, in terms of philosophy, you have, or in terms of science, you have to have objective facts established. You have to go through the epistemological process of finding out how you know something and justifying what you believe to be true. And then when you have something that you can believe to be true, you can test and utilize it. So we send people to the moon rather than like an asteroid somewhere off in the middle of nowhere. Like that's the difference between science and woo. Woo can't even get you off the ground as far as you can jump, but you can imagine all sorts of things if you go into a trance and you have a weird dream and you start believing that every feeling you have is true. Then you've dispensed with the guideposts and you've dispensed with the limitations of life. So without limitation, you can't build anything, because one part has to be up onto another part to make a strong structure. You have to have facts, and logic works that way, so that what you have in the end is not just a fantasy, it's actually a functional reality. You're not going to get that on social media, because
No.
like they're feeding you through that horrible algorithm. You can't even escape it. They can't even get your feed to just stay as like most recent. It's always like, you have to almost think in the back of your mind, like, do I ever want to comment on this guy's posts? Because if I do, they're going to start thinking he's my best friend. They're going to start feeding me more of this crap that I hate. I don't want.
Mhm.
I don't want it in my news feed. I don't want to see it. But I mean, I run these critical thinking groups, so I'm constantly looking for the weird stuff to put into the group.
Well, that's
And
a good segue
then
right
we
there,
can
Steve.
analyze it.
That's a good segue right there. Is you kind of live underneath a microscope, really, up there in the Bigfoot mecca of the world, Willow Creek, with your bookstore. But I mean, there's got to be, if you could pick, and I'm sure there's an encyclopedia of strange, whacked out shit that you've heard. But if you had to pick one of the all time, like, what the fuck was that person talking about? Bigfoot claim or woo story. Do you have one that you can touch on real quick? Like Ken Gerhard wanted to know what the weirdest shit claim that you had ever was regarding Bigfoot.
Well, like I was saying before, these things that used to seem so shocking, they're not anymore. It's just like in our popular culture, it used to be shocking if you saw someone, like a picture of a naked person or whatever. But now anybody can go look at porno on the internet, for free. And you don't even have to be a grown up, Like I remember growing up, we would find like a Playboy magazine. Oh my God, it's like nothing's shocking anymore.
Mhm.
I mean, that probably hasn't been shocking since that like Jane's Addiction record, but it's not shocking. So how can you even say anymore?
Yeah.
I sat here and I had on my front porch, Matthew Johnson came here and had lunch with us. We went to the Bigfoot restaurant and we talked with him for like 3 hours or whatever it was, all about his spiritual teacher, Zorth, the Bigfoot. Zorth is a Bigfoot who's on the Council of 12, who, is like 12 disciples like Jesus had. But,
Mhm.
Johnson is the 13th. He's the human one. And they're all Bigfoot from another planetary system. And like I said, he came through a portal because their planet was dying. And they can cloak and go invisibly, and they're just maybe like shimmery lights, like Predator, and they can turn into orbs and float through in the spirit body and go into other dimensions and live inside of trees and photosynthesize day, and then come out and they've got recharged energy. So now they're like a ape man walking in the woods for some reason. Like you know what I'm saying? That is a syncretic that's a
Right.
syncretic myth right there. That took these pieces from various things and put them together and made this ludicrous construction. And just like with Ron Moorhead and stuff, you've got the quantum physics and pseudoscience stuff. Like they the most shameful part of it is that they take something that it takes such great discipline to construct, like the whole process of science. It is ruthless on itself, and it has to be with great rigor true. It cannot pass a single lie through its own processing machine. Eventually, any lie or any falsehood in science will be chewed up and spat out and recycled immediately. I would argue that cults work the exact opposite way. That they build their systems out of lies, and the lies are like Matthew Johnson's lies, like that he hears these voices in his head and that there's some other being rather than himself talking to himself. I mean, what I'm saying is trying to respond to your question. Like, it used to be that there was just one thing, like one
one
thing.
screwed up.
Now it's like 20 freaking odd, weird things all in one bundle. And just when you've escaped it, then something new happens. Like like when Zorth predicted that Trump was going to be president. Like, why is this interplanetary, disembodied, 20-foot tall, tree dwelling, orb being, Bigfoot Sasquatch thing, all concerned about Trump winning or losing and making a prophecy even after the election results were in? Trump wins in the end, or I guess now he's backed off because Facebook was threatening him with like a fake news violation on his account.
Oh boy, Jesus Christ! It never ends.
It's like that's fake news. Like if there ever was fake news.
So let's shift gears. Let's shift on that. Yeah, on that note, let's shift gears and let's go over. And I want to talk first of all. A very much belated congratulations on everything that you have accomplished with the Bluff Creek project. And I do want to shift gears and start talking about that. I do want to remind everybody that we're live. And if you have any questions for Steven, hit him up in the comments section. But I do want to talk about the Bluff Creek project. Maybe a lot of people don't know what that is. But why don't you start bring us up to speed on how things are going with the Bluff Creek project, and for people that don't know about it, what it's all about.
Okay. Well, yeah, you might, so that I don't have to talk for 2 hours about it. You might,
right. Yeah, you can just
go
hit
look it up.
The high level
Bluff Creek project. Look at some of our videos. Look at some of the trail camera video stuff that we've got out there, and maybe go and look at our film site research, which you can find by saying Bluff Creek Film Site Project.
Yeah, we have the website. We've got the website up on the screen there, the Bluff Creek Project.blogspot.com. There it is. So we put that up on the page. So people can go to that and check it out.
Spot. And my own blog is Bigfoot Books blog.blogspot.com, just like that one is, but Bigfoot Books blog, all one word. And I don't really write on there so much anymore because I kind of transitioned over to the Facebook groups now. I write I probably write a full essay a day on Bigfoot just in those comments in those groups. I should be publishing these in a book or something, but anyway, the blog, I don't even know if anybody reads blogs anymore. It's like it's so tedious to read like a whole page of text, right? They want to be stimulated by videos and flashing the doodads and whatnot. But anyway, what we're saying, the Bluff Creek project started out as a historical project to find out the truth behind the local Bigfoot culture and history. Like that was me and a fellow I met eventually met in 2009, Ian Carden from over here in Reading. He and I had both been going up there to Bluff Creek a few times and just curious, where's the film site? Where was this Patterson film shot? And anyway, on my first trips up there were probably 1999 or 2000 and 2000 and 2001. And I could not find it. I found my way to like the most famous place, like Laos Camp, and camped there. And, the more you hike around, the more lost you feel because it's so overgrown up in there. And so by 2003, they had the International Bigfoot Symposium here in Willow Creek, which was a major deal. It brought it brought into the next millennium all the old timers like Jim McLaren, Ed Patrick, John Green, Bob Gimlin, and Al Hodgson. Just an endless collection of these old timer guys who ought to have known. And, more modern authors like Christopher Murphy and Daniel Perez, they ought to have known where the film site was. And they even had a TV show with Doug Hychek and his Mysterious Encounters crew, which at that time involved Moneymaker and Autumn Williams kind of vying for dominance on the show. Like, who was the real host? Like, everybody, of course, wanted to look at Autumn Williams, not Matt Moneymaker. But that also, had an entourage. And so between all these groups, nobody could find the film site, which to me was just shocking. I was living out here. I started to think to myself, how could they all have not known where it was? And I started asking questions of all the people who were involved. What did you think? Where do you think it was? What do you know about the environment and the history of this? And it was just endlessly convoluted because everyone had a different memory, a different theory, or a different ideology. Like MK Davis, he thought it was way down the opposite direction from where everybody else was looking, which was upstream from where they went. And so MK Davis had his own film site over there, and then there were like 7 other ones, and we just decided this is really too confusing. We are gonna have to solve this problem. And so we set off to do that in 2009. And then in 2010, we got a friend of ours join up with us. It was Robert Leiterman, the state parks forest ranger, who's also one of the earliest BFRO expedition organizers that there was. He joined us, and he was our videographer at first, just recording us babbling on and on and on, making all manner of mistakes for 2010 and 2011. So we had 3 years basically of studying this thing until we had finally felt like we got rid of all the baloney, and we got right down to surveying the site that we thought was the most likely site, and it turned out to be the exact site, without any doubt. Eventually, we surveyed the site on a grid that we lined up with a compass and tape measure, and so it was all very exact in 10 by 10 squares, and we documented every piece of whatever was in that 10 by 10 square to see what was there that was old. Like, could it have been there in 1967 was our question. And we had to eliminate everything else, all the young trees, all the big piles of brush and vines and broken branches and everything that was obscuring the site. So we had a record of old stumps that were, to our amazement, were in the exact same location that they were in 1967. Like, everyone has said, there's not going to be a stump there after 40 or 50 years. But guess what? There was, and the log jams that are down in the creek, those things still haven't washed or rotted away. They're the same wood, and it's up on sand. Up on the sandbars, a raised sandbar. So when that big flood in '64 came through, it deposited all that fine silt sand and gravel, and then ran through and left behind a bunch of log jams as the dam blasted through, and all that water went down through the whole creek canyon doing that. But what we had in '64 was just blasted out completely, and that's where you see paddy walking, is on that fine silt that was left behind by the flood. And by the '70s, it had already started growing back trees, just growing right out of the gravel. Right. So by the '80s, it started, and those are like pretty much the last reliable visits to the site that we were able to find public record of. Was in the '80s, the late '80s, maybe a few in the early '90s, but at that point, it just dropped off the map, and nobody we could find knew where this film site was anymore. And there were always rumors that there was somebody out there who did know, but it didn't do us much good if they were like in an old age home and senile, right? Or dead. Right. A lot of people, like Renee Hinden, obviously was the one who knew best, because even Peter Byrne couldn't identify the film site, and he took the best photographs of the film site back in '71 or '2, whatever year that was, and but he asked in the 2000s, and he obviously had no clue, because we went to exactly where he said it was, and for one, it's on the wrong side of the creek. The gravel part is over here, and he had it all backwards, and there wasn't enough room in there to do anything either. Yeah, so they just make up stuff, to cover their asses, basically. Oh, well, that's because the creek moved, and it's like, no, it didn't.
Now, was
how
there an
could the creek
epiphany?
have been flowing over
aha-
there on the side of the mountain? Huh?
Was there an aha moment that you had? Remember, we were talking last night on when me, you, and Mike were talking, and was there an aha moment when you guys are all sitting around arguing and you're looking at stuff and saying, "Wait a minute, that tree looks like that." Can you reiterate that, because we were talking about that last night?
Well, yeah. So you can watch our videos. We left all the mistake in there because we wanted to show this as a process of learning. This is how you do an investigation. You come up with hypotheses and you try to test them as best you may. In reality, and our laboratory was Bluff Creek, and we tested all the theories, and that was the real aha moment, was to realize how full of doo-doo all the Bigfooters were. Like, almost all of them were full of it, and the only ones who weren't full of it were like Bobo, Cliff, those friends of mine, and a small handful of people who were earnest and honest about what they knew and didn't know, like Tom Steenberg, for instance, Daniel Perez. These are the people that may not have been able to go to the film site in 2003 and find it, but they each had important clues. That all these clues added up, and finally, the truth was there. Like when Finding Bigfoot came down to bring Bob Gimlin back to the film site, we were the ones in the background, helping their production team locate the area where it was. And, so Bob had said something back in 2003, I really think, he said this apparently just to Bobo, and he said, he turned to Bobo and sort of said, Bobo, I think this is where we first saw her, right here, and pointed at that spot, which just happens to be, Bob Gimlin's probably not a book nerd, studying the Daniel Perez booklet with that little map in there where the X was put on the picture, and that was taken from the map that marked for Daniel Perez. And so that's where Cliff Barrickman learned of the site location. But, even then we weren't able to prove it. And, to a certain degree, some of those guys like Bobo and Tom Yamarone and whatnot, Paul Graves probably too, the California or West Coast crew that we had back then, kind of didn't want it to be published, they didn't want it to be spoiled by a bunch of people come pouring in there. And,
I can understand that.
Well, maybe that's where that accusation that crazy lady Tara makes, the Happy Camp lady, that we are trying to turn Bluff Creek into Disneyland. I mean,
right, yeah, because you've been getting some pushback from some people up there that you're trying to turn it into you want to pave it and turn it into an amusement park. And
we haven't gotten any pushback from real locals.
No, I know, but there's some people.
She's a woman that came from out of the area, and she pretends now to be a native person, and I don't think she is. I think she's Dutch and Latin American. But anyway, when she got out of the psychiatric prison, she came up here and started doing Bigfoot stuff with Tom Biscardi. Whether she was an active hoaxer with Tom Biscardi or whether just used by Biscardi, we don't know. But she was the one that supposedly had a trail camera in her yard observing Bigfoot, and Tom Biscardi was selling this on Coast to Coast AM, like a pay-per-view live cam. That was in her backyard. So this is the lady now who who's been saying stuff around locally, like these guys, the Bluff Creek guys, are trying to exploit sacred native grounds. Well, these are not sacred native spots. The sacred native spots are on a trail that goes on the ridges above, past Bluff Creek, up to the Medicine Rocks, the high mountain rocks up there, and that is not where the Bluff Creek project goes. That's actually not tribal land even now today, but obviously traditionally it is. So we respect the hell out of that. We don't do anything up there that is going to hurt anybody's spirituality or the environment. Quite the contrary. But she says that around here locally. That's something that could very likely get you killed. If someone gets it in their head, like, oh, these outsiders are coming in here and trying to take over Bluff Creek and damage it somehow, that could get you killed, or at least your car vandalized. Up there in the mountains in the middle of nowhere, it's not exactly safe to have someone out to get you. And that's exactly what she wanted to happen to us. She spread these lies and rumors around the local community, intentionally trying to cause us harm. And the only harm we ever did to her was to question her obviously hoaxy bullshit evidence and her claims of Bigfoot coming to her house every night. Obviously I'm going to question that. I mean, I'm not insulting people who think that's happening. I'm just curious, like, well, if you say it's happening, how are you going to prove it? How can you assert these things that Bigfoot is in your yard every night and you have no evidence of it? Or, well, the evidence they have of it is a feather on the ground or a stick made into like an X on the ground, or a pile of limbs that fell off a tree and made an X or a Y, or I mean, these are the kind of things that they consider evidence of Bigfoot. And to me, that's like, well, that's nothing. That happens in my backyard in my house up on the hill here every day. Yeah. But it ain't Bigfoot doing it. I mean, an honest person is going to notice that when the weather comes, it's going to blow some branches off your trees. But also when the weather turns cold, when it rains or snows for the first time in the season, or maybe when it warms up and the things dry out, you're going to have more breaking branches piling up. Wood knocks are going to happen when the wood cracks and breaks, falls against itself, piles up on the ground, and eventually if you take random patterns, you're going to find that throw a bunch of sticks together, they're going to make X's and Y's and A's, and those aren't letters of the alphabet. They're just they're random shapes that are formed. And then when you go around looking for Bigfoot with this squatch on the brain disease, you will see it everywhere you go. And the more your confirmation bias kicks in, the more you're going to see it everywhere you go. Until one of these people like Arla Williams, who drove out here from Oklahoma to Washington for a Bigfoot conference, and she said her friend Big with her in the front seat of her car, but he was invisible. This is Indigo, the Bigfoot, who mind speaks there, and he's sitting there right in her car, but he's invisible. And then her and Tom Cantrell get up there on stage and give their talks, and Cantrell is basically saying, like, I'm standing here and there's Bigfoot on either side of me, right now, but you can't see them. They're cloaked.
Yeah, well, we've heard. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Mike, you're muted.
How did I
Mike.
get off on that again, though?
Yeah,
that's okay.
No, it's. I was gonna say one thing that really irks me about this, particular community, particular space is, like, I just feel like too many people buy into the whole phenomena about stick structures, tree breaks, those bizarre formations and things like that. Like, I have literally down the street from my house, I have like this little nature preserve. It's like, it's like a lake, some forest, but on either side there's fucking like major highways going, like that intersect each other alongside of it. And like I'll walk through there sometimes and I'll find, like these so-called oddities that a lot of people like, in this field will attribute to like tree structures and shit like that. Like that's me personally. That's why I don't buy into that stuff. Things like, tree structures, tree breaks, those bizarre formations, because like 9,099%, 9,099 times out of 10,000 probably, and that's probably that's like probably a conservative number. Those things that people attribute to, these creatures doing or, something organic doing, it's it's more likely than not a natural formation, like you said, like weather and things like that. But you try to tell it to some of these people and they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, and what's happening when they don't want to hear it and they refuse to listen, they're going to call you closed-minded. But in fact, I would say no, it's they who are closed-minded, because someone like us who's trying to point out to them that in the ordinary universe there are some basic things that are real, like gravity and the geometry of sticks, how randomness works in the mind, and how we have selective pattern recognition that causes us not only to see meaning in stick structures, but also in blob squatch like pareidolia effects, or you see like the animal in the clouds or whatever it is. Your mind forms these things out of whole cloth. But when you're totally submerged in that, aren't you denying reality? Aren't you actually not looking at reality, but choosing instead what you believe about reality? And you prefer this version of experience to the other one, which is so full of limitations. And I don't want to be like that. I want to have everything be magical. I mean, isn't that how it is? Like, to me, that's closed-minded. To go around with your belief system and stick that on everything is closed-mindedness. Right. But what is open-mindedness is the skeptical mind, the curious thinker who's willing to confront anything. I mean, anything that is presented to them, including the most bizarre stuff in the universe, like quantum physics and like, string theory and psychedelics and neurology, and just you can go on and on and on with these kind of things that rational scientific people will look at and will study and will try to understand, but the woo-woos don't, because they have a sacred cow that they will just never. It's kind of like in India, you got all these sacred cows, and you got people starving to death because they won't eat the cows. But anyway,
yeah, for me, it kind of traces back to the whole notion of I feel like there's a lot of people in this field who their thought process on this whole phenomena, they more so want it to be real than actually think pragmatically think it's real. And I really think like right now in this field, in this space, there's too many people that want it to be real, whose voices are, for lack of a better word, too loud, that are, kind of getting the spotlight. And I really think it gives like a lot of people you, for instance, a couple of people with the crippling thoughts, like it kind of gives them like a bad light when they're looked at through the lens of mainstream science or mainstream media. Like me personally, I definitely believe in the possibility something like this exists. Obviously, I'm going to stay reserved like that until I actually see something for myself. But when you look at just like the closed-minded outlook some of these people have, and just like the influence they have and the interactions they have with the mainstream outlets, that the more dedicated objective thinkers are trying to get their attention to have them taken seriously, like it kind of defeats the purpose of if that makes any sense.
Reality is not a popularity contest.
No.
Right? You know, I mean, it's not about making friends and smiley faces and stuff. Like, I mean, I'm so past all that. I don't need to make friends in Bigfoot groups. You know, I've got real friends in real life and also online friends. And, you know, I don't need to go and please everybody in my group. Like, somebody has to be willing to draw a line in the sand and say, this is bullshit and this is not, you know, and
Right.
well, what is the method to free yourself from BS, you know? And there is a way, and I'm it's not like a spiritual path or anything. It's just very basic, you know. Use your mind to think and don't get so personally involved in the results, you know. Um, you just have to go out and fight, like Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, right? Like, you know, here you are, your karma has made such that you are in a human body and you are in a war, and your state is at war with these invaders, and you have to go fight them. And then Arjuna is like, well, I want to, you know, I want to live a spiritual life and learn from you, Krishna. And he's like, no, you have to go kill people, right? Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a metaphor, right?
Right.
You have to face reality without your wishes. And the most exciting thing when you've dispensed with the egotism of it all is just to be able to discover real things, like how amazingly diverse the universe is. How look at life on Earth, how incredibly complicated it is. You know, it's not just some thing that you can read about in some religious book and say God made humans and the seventh day he rested or whatever. That is that doesn't explain anything unless you're totally unwilling to investigate the real situation yourself and to find out the truth. You know, if you want some paper explanation that is gonna masquerade for the truth, then so be it. You're free to do so. I'm not here to take anyone's fantasy life away from them, you know. But I'm just saying, like, I don't live in a fantasy world, you know, like this. I'm like an existentialist, you know. I'm looking at everything as much as I can, as newly and freshly as I can, always, so that I can actually see what it is, you know, rather than what I want it. If the world were wanted it to be, we'd all be. I mean, none of us would have jobs, and we'd all be sitting on the beach, you know, going boogie boarding or something, right? I mean, like when you're a kid, that's what we did. We just had fun all the time. Why isn't life like that? Why do we have to get old
Damn
and
it.
work all the time? Yeah. Well, anyway, that's to me that's part of open-mindedness, is to observe things objectively and to have a methodology that excludes your belief systems from the epistemological process, you know, trying to understand things that you're part of but not dictating. You know, you're not the controller of the universe, however much these people want to say like quantum physics means that anything is real, or that anything you imagine or wish to believe could be true. And there's infinite universes, and each one is like catered to whatever person happens to be in it. I mean, that's what that is solipsism. It's like the default, you know, failure of the mind to understand objective things. And like, I mean, if you don't have faith in an objective reality, well, then I don't know what you are, some kind of sociopathic narcissist, because there is obviously a reality out there that we're a part of in some mysterious way, uh, you know. And if you need a spiritual metaphor for that, like, so be it. It's great, but you know, I'm not going to sit and like just accept that somebody is experiencing literally, truly, a voice in their head that comes from an interplanetary Sasquatch. You know, I mean, I'm not going to believe you. I'm like, so like this is why I wanted to talk about Bluff Creek Project. We had the film site. We had the film site project to prove how, well, for one, to prove the location of the film site, but also beyond that, we wanted to show to the best of our ability as amateurs and, what they like to call citizen scientists nowadays. Like Jeff Meldrum advocates for this and stuff. You don't have to be a PhD guy or gal to go out and do this stuff. You could just learn as best you can and go out and investigate reality and learn from the first principles.
Right.
Learn botany, learn hydrology, learn meteorology, learn history, geology, all these things, wildlife biology, these things all play into like our understanding of Bluff Creek. And you'd be surprised how much you can learn just by trying to do one thing, how to find one spot on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
We had to learn all sorts of things, and that's including learning how to think, learning how to really think and use logic and analysis, and to rule out falsehood, and to come to reasonable provisional conclusions, or the decent hypotheses that can be worked with and tested. And so when we had all that, we found the film site. We hoped that we had at least demonstrated, like, among all the Bigfooter stuff that people do, you can prove something. Maybe you didn't prove that Bigfoot exists, but we at least proved something.
It was a pretty good freaking job finding the film spot, because I guarantee you, I've never been there, but I can't imagine that it looks anything like it looked back in 1967 at all.
Well, it does sort of look more like that now, because we've gone in there and we've cleared out all the dead wood. Like, we cut out all the dead branches and hauled them off, set them in compost over the side. So it's not like we're building a parking lot, right? Like some people said, but we did like make a trail, not by digging it up and running a bulldozer, but just by walking on it constantly and then marking
a footpath
it.
in the trail
Other
path.
people can other people can go up there and find the film site too. And not only that, when they do so, they'll be walking on the safest route, the best, most comfortable route, and the one that's going to do the least damage to the rest of the environment all around you. And, at that point, we sort of said to ourselves, what else can we do? So what we had always thought in the back of our minds was like, this is where Patty was filmed, walking here on the sandbar. Like the most iconic image of a Bigfoot that anybody has, it walked right here. Either that was like the amazing wildlife or anthropological film of all time, or one of the greatest, most brilliant hoaxes of all. And in either case, you had a great place to just stand there and go, wow, this is really cool. And the fact that it was lost, it's like losing Gettysburg or some other place like that. I mean, like saying, where was JFK shot? Well,
yes, the grassy knoll.
We don't know where the grassy knoll is anymore. The grassy knoll has vanished into time. So we found a place like that, which is kind of, I think, really rare to have that opportunity in today's world, to find just in your own local environment a real mystery that you could explore and understand and learn from. That it's like, being like Sherlock Holmes or something. Like you suddenly you have this amazing thing that you can learn about, and by doing so, it maybe makes some things better for other people in the future. At least we have real knowledge rather than some BS myth like that. 20 years from now, there's going to be some guy named whatever his name is, just like us, who's going to come along and say, where's that damn film site, Steve? And I'm going to, I can't tell you anymore. Jesus. I remember that night we were drinking a lot of whiskey in Louse Camp, and that's when Steve, we saw Roger and Bob ride by on their horses. And
Steve, I wanted to ask you, because you've worked being up there, and you talked about working with the Finding Bigfoot crew and showing them where the place was. You've worked with a lot of a lot of names into Bigfoot research, and you've worked on a lot of more than your share of TV shows and films. So I wanted to pick your brain and ask you what your opinion of the Bigfoot as a business is, and why can't people seem to separate the entertainment side of things, like with Sergeant Russ Accord and his dynamic research,
Yeah.
and the real boots on the ground research. I mean, I've got a picture here that I'll have them throw up, and you can comment on this, and you can kind of just lead into the difference between entertainment and the real research. And I'll throw this picture up, and you can see, and I'll let you just go from there on this one.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the thing about entertainment, that's all good and fine, right?
Right.
But I would hope that our entertainers could at least admit that they are entertainers. And I know, like, the Mountain Monsters guys, the Ames team, are not a real research group.
They're not?
And that's very different from finding Bigfoot. Now, I happen to know those guys in real life, and the stuff they do on that show is actually what they do in real life. Like, Bobo was just off doing that right now, like, not paid by anybody, looking. And maybe there are some moments where the producer's saying, Bobo, can you do that again, or whatever, just to trying to get a good representation of the research without faking it, and after season 1 of the show, where there were some major goof ups in the editing room, mostly, they put their foot down and they said, we're not going to be hoaxers. If you want us to do this show, you have to let us do our real thing and not put some fake crap on top of it and not mold it into your own shape, So there are things you have to do to set up a good filming or video recording environment. You have to have sound and light and stuff into consideration, and you have to have camera people there. And it's hard to just go with a cell phone and hold it up and then try to make that into a decent TV show.
Yes.
I mean, that's YouTube as far as for all the amateur people to go out there with their cell phone and jiggle it around in the woods, making this intolerably unwatchable crap, But the Expedition Bigfoot show is kind of like made by the same network people, own the Discovery Networks. So whether it's shown on the Travel Channel or whatever, it doesn't matter. Animal Planet, these same producing companies and the same network are looking for the same basic kind of content. And what they're getting from Finding Bigfoot is one version of that. And obviously they wanted to take more control of the production value and maybe bring in some new wingding things, new thermal and other kind of technology. And maybe it looks good on the screen, but the fact is that they're not actually really conducting Bigfoot research. They're conducting a video production event that depicts Bigfoot research. And we found this out in season 1 when they had said they were out in this remote wilderness, but in fact they were getting cell phone reception. And their one guy, Bryce, was in some nice lodge that looked like it was on a ranch of some kind, and he's conveniently able to access highways and stores and witnesses out there, and then go and immediately be right back with his team out in the woods. Quote unquote woods. But I mean, in fact, it was all shot on a dude ranch, like you guys probably know, the Antone Ranch, and they claimed they had an algorithm that showed that Bigfoot was the most active in this area during a certain like brief period of time, like 3 weeks, that if they went there, they would be almost certain to find Bigfoot. In fact, if you look at the map and the Bigfoot sightings map, there's almost no reports of Bigfoot. In that, if you took, I mean, Washington, Oregon, California, that basic area, and like the states next to it, like Idaho, that is the one area where there's a void, like a black hole of Bigfoot, where there's nothing happening. And so right off the bat, episode 1 or 2, we were all trying to do like watch parties. You know, someone in the group, I won't say who, was, you know, piping it in from a piracy site, and we all watched it and we're just laughing our heads off. It was great entertainment, but we also realized like it was complete BS. You know, where they would find things that just seemed perfectly set up. You know, like they're wandering around and all of a sudden, oh, look at this. Holy crap. Oh my God. And like there's like a pile of sticks, you know, that looks like some hut that some, you know, Boy Scouts might have made. It's obviously one of those classic human survival hut constructions. And like, you know, they pretend that it's Bigfoot, that it smells like Bigfoot. They find a dead hawk and they throw the hawk's carcass on the ground next to it to make it look like something's been there eating hawks. Or, you know, I mean, even though, you know, it didn't look like any of the meat was actually taken off the hawk. It was just like it was dead or killed. You know, and various other things like the tracks they would find, they all looked either fake or they looked like they obviously weren't tracks. And the sounds, you know, any sound that they heard, even Maria Mayor, the lady who has a PhD, she's actually a scientist, along with being, you know, like a TV host and cheerleader. Like
cheerleader, yes, of course.
She hears what sounds obviously like whatever it is, coyotes or maybe an owl or something.
Now, did you watch
and,
did you watch season 2 all the way through?
Yeah, eventually I did. I found out that I could get free. I was adamant that I wasn't going to pay anything to support this, but since they gave it to me for free through Verizon, I said, what the hell? And yeah, I watched it. Mostly it put me to sleep, but I was able to go back and, you know, watch it again just so I didn't miss any crucial issues. I didn't take notes this time like I did last time. Like last time it was like a lot of detective work, and there were several people involved in my group, and like that Grassman guy from Ohio, and there were some real sharp wits on the Bigfoot forums who basically figured all this all out. And season 2, they tried to avoid that. They were like sneaky, like trying to make it a little bit more realistic, but still, like every time that an event would come up, you knew what it was going to be, some fake looking thing,
right?
And it's obvious, you know, that there's probably a pre-production process where they go through and they either set up the evidence, like, or they find a divot in the ground, maybe it's even a bear track or something, or maybe it's human tracks. I think they found both of those in this last episode.
That's what that picture was from. That's what I threw that up.
That image is a contour scan. They also have a cast, and they have, you know, video images of the tracks in the substrate. And this all happened like, you know, in predictably lame ways. You know, they're out on some bridge. That bridge over the creek, it's an old railroad transom, probably for logging, you know. But he's out there walking on the bridge just for the pretty imagery of it, you know. Like, we could probably find this on the internet somewhere. Like, where did they exactly film this? And see just how, like, probably not remote it really was. But I mean, no one's bothered to do that. It's almost not worth the time anymore because we already know how fake they are. So,
Exactly.
like, even though they're totally fake, they're still out there in the woods. So some people are always saying, well, why just give them a chance, But I mean, like, how do I know that I could trust anything they say or do after what they did in season 1? It's so fake. In every single episode, almost every single thing they ever did or said was fake. I mean, and then in real life, they're out here in their characters themselves. They're not playing a fake person. So when Russell Acorn or Bryce or RPG say
Yes,
things,
RPG.
I mean, I think RPG is a good guy, and I think probably what happened with him is it was the pains of conscience that he he just realized, I can't go through with this. I'm not going to be able to lie for 3 weeks and then have it all on major network television. So he either made himself sick or pretended to be sick, and it acted like he was zapped by a Bigfoot. Like
Yeah,
the classic.
he must have had an NDA or some sort of contractual commitment, because they did get him on, like, I think it was episode 1 or episode 2 in the second season, where they had him check in to make sure that let him know that he was all okay, and he was probably some. So he was probably
And
like,
also, I mean,
better you than me, guys.
These NDAs, they apply to real life. So, like, I happen to know about this because I've seen my friends operate under them too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there were lots of things that they wanted to do, like with Bobo and Cliff. Like, they wanted Bobo's dog to be under exclusive contract to Discovery Networks. And Bobo's like
Monkey?
refusing. No, my dog is not your exclusive intellectual property. If my dog wants to bark or sniff or do whatever, she's going to do it. She's not going to ask whether she can go hang out with the rival people over there. But the truth of the matter is that they were, like, in real life, talking on Facebook, and not just on the page where they're officially representing the show, and they're deleting all comments that are contrary to their show's claims.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we had to start our own Finding Bigfoot. Expedition Bigfoot fan page, because we knew that they were going to censor everything we said. So we started our own, and it actually drew more fans than their main regular one did. It got tremendously popular all of a sudden. I didn't do it, but I know who did.
Yeah.
Anyway, you could probably find out if you really wanted to, but it was just hilarious because they all thought we were like the people on the show or representing the show. And it was really a useful study because you could see the desire that people have to believe just about anything.
Well, that's what I was talking
resistance.
about. The difference between the media and fact and fiction is a lot of people they want to believe that everything that Russ's backpack is full of technology, because that backpack got bigger and bigger every week. Jesus, what the hell was in that thing?
Did you notice whenever he picks it up? I mean, I've been on like week-long backpacking trips, or even longer, some of them. And, you have to carry a lot of food and other things. His backpack is not heavy. It's like
it was massive.
Really, really big, but he picks it up like he's Superman. He's putting it on, like, kind of hamming it up, acting a little bit. But obviously they didn't discipline him enough on that. There's too many times where he picks it up with one arm and he just kind of walking around with this. It obviously weighs nowhere near like it looks to weigh.
Right.
And like that's just another example of how fake they are. Because they if you look, you never see them unroll a sleeping bag or anything. They put up tents once in a while, but they never seem to have used them. I mean, I think there's like one night where they camped out in season 1, but that could have been fake too.
Yeah.
Just act like you just woke up.
And to be 100% clear with everybody, and there's probably people out there, and I don't know if they're listening right now, but I don't care what you do on the show. If you want to run around and take your drone out of your backpack and shoot thermal footage of Bigfoot, if it's not real research, just say in the beginning that this is not based on factual research. This is just a dramatization of what could actually happen. But don't claim for it to be actual research. Because a lot of people are saying, well, you're just haters because you want to be on the show and stuff like that. I don't give a shit. I wish them all the luck in the world, but just don't call it research.
Yeah, it's really simple. Like we used to see in the 70s, like the In Search of TV show. Every episode at the beginning said something like, you must think for yourselves. These are only claims. They have not been, whatever their disclaimer at the very beginning, warning you that these are weird claims. They may not be true. We're doing this to present you with the concept and see, you can go see what you think about it yourself. But
right.
To go on like Facebook and then have conferences and talk and social media and other places to do media interviews and other, I can't remember all the things they did, but they appeared all over the place, repeating the lies in real life.
The propaganda, yeah, it's ridiculous, and I don't understand. I'm not sure. Maybe you would know this, Stephen. Is if any of them actually got up there and talked and gave an actual a lecture about their research, that would be just sheer fraud. At that point, I'm not sure if anybody paid to see that, but I doubt. It probably happened somewhere along the line at a conference.
We would have learned more in that regard, except for the pandemic, which pretty much shut down the conferences, the circuit that they were planning to do.
Well, I think the conferences are coming back this year. I think some of the conferences are coming back this year. I know I'm going to see Daniel Perez out in Ohio, and I think there's going to be some. Are there any out in California this year that you know that are definitely on so far?
No, I mean, like I was saying, we don't even have vaccines enough out here yet. California is really, I mean, I don't know, we're really behind that. You would think, like, a progressive state, they'd be on top of things, but there's not enough supply, and there's all these bureaucrats now trying to say who's eligible, who's not eligible. I mean, I think they just should have like mass vaccination events and, get millions of doses and get everybody set so that we can maybe move forward. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's been all year.
They've had out here in the city, they had Yankee Stadium. They were doing 24-hour shots, and I know Mike lives down closer to the city than I do because I live up in the Catskills. But there were some places like the Javits Center that were doing 24-hour Johnson & Johnson. Mike actually had the COVID, but it seems to be that maybe all the stuff is produced on the West Coast or the East Coast, and they're having trouble getting it out to California. But that sucks.
I don't know.
That's awful.
Distribution nightmare. I'm just glad, I guess, because they sent way too many doses to the Native American community out here that they actually have enough left over for everybody else. Because Native Americans are definitely high risk for this virus. Out here, there's a lot of high risk people too. I mean, I'm one of them, but there's a lot of older people out here too, retirees and stuff. It'd just be awesome to nip it in the bud and hope it works.
Well, I wish you the best of luck with that.
We would have learned a lot more about that show if it had been held up to the scrutiny of live events. And it's like, I could just see it happening. Like Michael Merchant shows up at the Ohio conference or whatever. It says,
I'd love.
Russell,
he's coming on here in a couple weeks. He's coming on here in a couple weeks. I can't wait to fucking I can't wait to fucking pick his brain on that.
Did you really find a Bigfoot track on the creek side that last episode of season 2? And he's gonna go, well, I mean, okay, this is the crucial moment. Does he say, well, yes, I did. I believe it's real. And Jeff Meldrum even said it was real. Or is he gonna say, well, no, like I had the stomper in my backpack and I found some bear track. and I kind of pushed the stumper into the ground, and that's why it looks weird, because 2/3 of the track is all looks like it was shaped and molded and pushed in a certain way, not in a way that would be pushed by a walking animal. But then the front of the track, it looks like either a classic Gray's Harbor track thing, like Jeff Meldrum always holds up, look, here it is.
Right.
A little too good to be true, but then it also looks a lot like a bear track.
Right.
Bears can really look a lot like human or Bigfoot, and then there was another trackway that he supposedly found, but there's still such poorly edited and so poorly documented that you can't even tell like which one is which until later. And one, they finally backed off, and instead of showing it really up close, like, look at that, it looks totally like a Bigfoot track. You see it on the sandbar down below, and it's so obvious. It's about 12 inches long. It's a human track, obviously a human track. I mean, unless Bigfoot is the exact same as a human.
Right.
And the other track was probably modified. And the fact that he only cast one track out of all that, and then sent that to Meldrum, and they didn't show any of the other stuff, like the whole video process and documenting the whole trackway, the kind of things that Meldrum would obviously want to see, right? Like,
of course.
If I were a scientist, I'd want to see every track, the whole thing shown in front of me, not just the track cast, because the track cast is the easiest thing to fake. And we know plenty. Like, Meldrum has all these criteria that he says you can't beat these. Well, it's big enough. Oh, okay, so we all know that we have to make a Bigfoot track over 14 inches, otherwise it's going to be too small. Okay, so it's big enough. Oh, it has these bumps on the side. Well, okay, we've all seen the tracks have those bumps on the side.
There, I just put the picture up.
Because of the bones.
There's the picture I think you're talking about from the show. Can you see that, Steve?
Yeah, and like if you look at the thing when Meldrum's holding it up, the supposed break in the foot that he always talks about, the mid-tarsal break, is not a mid-tarsal break. It's more like a up in the front of the foot, right? Exactly where you'd expect the tail end of the bear's front paw to go, because the bear's front paw is shorter, right? The back foot of the bear is longer. So when you combine the two or three, or if you're on like if you know about bears, they'll walk on the same pathway over and over again. They'll follow each other's the same game trails.
I think this
and
is
they go along the same game trails as deer or whatever other prey or food source that they're seeking.
Is this the one you're talking about there, Steve?
Yeah, look, see right up there in the front. Look what's that? That's not a mid-tarsal break. See it right there. There's the toes, and then move right. There's a big bulge at the ball, and then there's a break right there. Yeah, that's not mid-tarsal. The when Meldrum's talking about a mid-tarsal break, that's where that crack is, where they broke the cast in the middle.
Literally a mid-tarsal break.
That's more where it's supposed to be. If you're going by all of his other images, like the one from the the Patterson film site,
right,
which famously shows that bulge in the middle of the foot where it's seemingly rotated, different from human anatomy would do. Humans have that arched foot. You can I don't see in that colored image that you showed. It really does kind of look like there's an arch in the foot, but for some weird reason, that's that clip that you showed. It's only the top end of the foot, it doesn't show the whole thing.
The thermal.
I don't know why.
The thermal one.
Yeah, it's like a contour scan that looks like a thermal. The
right
colored
here.
one.
Bill, bring that up right there.
See that? It looks like there's an arch there, doesn't it? But anyway,
it looks like a human. It looks like a human foot to me. It really does. I mean, I don't know. It looks a lot like if I was to walk down the sidewalk and put a thermal right after it. But again, that's just me.
So I'm not saying Meldrum's lying or anything like that, but they probably said, Jeff, will you verify this track for us? And he knows, like, that doesn't mean falsify, it means verify.
Right, yeah.
But they probably, like, they leave him some opportunity to maybe say, like, skeptical things, which they could always cut out in the editing room, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
If they doesn't say it's real, they can make it look like he says maybe it's real.
Right.
But
well, they did that. They did that with Les Stroud when Les Stroud was on, and Les faked one on purpose, and then took it to Meldrum. And Meldrum was being very nice to Les about. With I think Bindernagel was there, somebody was there, and they were looking at it, and you could tell that Jeff didn't think it was freaking real, but he didn't want to say it right on camera.
He did identify the hoax footprint.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Track. Of course. Yeah. He did. Yeah.
He actually did.
Yeah. No, I know, but he was being. You could tell where Jeff was being nice about it, and it was. He was
trying to be nice. Yeah, I remember that.
Hey, so like, Steve, we are out of time, my friend. We have to go. I wish we could talk for 3 freaking hours, but we got 6 minutes before we need to jump off the channel. I can't thank you enough.
Let me just say real quickly. Never finished talking about the Bluff Creek project. So, what we do now is a trail camera survey. Mm-hmm. We have 15 to 20 cameras implemented throughout Bluff Creek area. Most of them are very obvious. So if you're walking around out there and you want your privacy, it's going to be pretty clear that we're active in that area. But there are also some hidden ones that are observing those more obvious ones. But anyway, like out on the film site and nearby, on a couple of up there, we use active all year round. We have bad enough out of it a whole year. We have been doing the 2012 in the summer. This has been 8 years now, pretty much, that we've had them going, and not a single Bigfoot image. But we've gotten amazing documentation of all the wildlife that is active out there that doesn't have superpowers to evade trail cameras like Bigfoot does, supposedly. One of the things we've gotten is the Humboldt marten, and like that. Those are the martens. They're a unique subspecies to the coastal redwoods and inland from their zone in Northern California and Southern Oregon. So these guys were officially declared an endangered species like just a year ago by the federal government. So we've totally won the victory on that. We've been advocating for years. And, one of the few places they've been reliably documented is on the Patterson film site and right nearby it, by us, So we're like pretty proud of that. Once again, it didn't prove Bigfoot existed, but it did accomplish something through citizen science, right? It showed.
I think it was a huge step forward.
It shows bears and it shows mountain lions and bears and all the other animals that live up there, and also maybe, hopefully, someday we might even have wolves coming through that area because they're up in the area just northeast of Bluff Creek right now. So you can go to that site and that link, and you can support the project if you want.
That's what we're doing. Is we're going to donate a camera. Yep.
Yeah, you can give us old cameras, but we want high quality ones. If they're like not the top notch camera, that's okay too, because we could always just put it up, as an extra somewhere. But what we do have is crowdfunding, where you can donate to support a camera, right? And then Jamie's the tech guy for all these cameras, along with Rowdy. Rowdy's sort of a film production guy. And so, and Robert Leiterman, he's done some trail camera work in the past, but it seems mostly Jamie's handling the funding and buying of new cameras as we need them. And you can support that if you want.
I'm still waiting for my email back from Jamie. Our group, the CARC, is donating money for a camera rig and some beers for you guys. We're going to buy you some virtual beers.
Always appreciated.
Exactly.
But none of the money goes to me or any of us. We actually spend a lot of our own time and money, gas money and food money and beer money to go on these trips. So any support that people put into it is really just more of the citizen science ideal that we can do these things without corporations and universities and all these other things funding us. We don't even need multimillionaires like Tom Slick or Wally Urson.
Tom Slick must have been fun to hang out with, though. Tom Slick was. I bet you he was a blast to hang out with back in the day.
Oh, sure, he's a very early on dude. Interested in the Himalayan snowman before Bigfoot really hit the scene. So, he would have been a very important guy had he stuck around and not
Bill,
tragically died.
Throw that address up there, Bill, real quick. I just want to put the one more time. So everybody out there still tuning in, the bluffcreekproject.blogspot.com. Go to that site, read up on the group, donate to them. It's a good cause. They're not getting rich. They're not fucking farming it out to other people. They're doing the work by themselves, and they're doing it for a good cause. So get in there and help out.
And all the images are up on. We have a Facebook page, and we also have a YouTube account. So the YouTube account is linked on the blog there, or you could just search for Bluff Creek Project, which is all one word, on YouTube. And you'll see different things on the two different pages. Mostly it's like the highlights of wildlife, but on the Facebook page, there's a really cool video that Rowdy shot with the drone launching up from where the Patterson campsite was and then going upstream about 3 miles to the film site, following the creek. So, I mean, this is a real first. No one has ever done that we know of before. And it is extraordinary. The views are just awesome to look at.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to get out there sooner than later and pick up the work where you picked off. Guys, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, man. Everybody out there that came on, that chatted, that set the questions. Steve, I can't thank you enough. I wish we had 4 hours to talk. We're definitely going to have you come back, and we can pick up right where we left off if you're willing to come back in the future. No
problem. Or maybe other guys that I always like to emphasize. It's not just me doing it. We have a group.
Yeah.
It's 7 or 8 whatever guys doing the studies.
Yeah,
and I want all of them to get credit for what they do.
Yeah, if you want to share my contact, if you want to share my contact with those guys, we'd love to talk to any one of them about more about this. But anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. And like I said, if anybody reached out and gave us a super chat, we appreciate you. We here at the CARC love all you folks out there. And we love it, not in the creepy internet stalker way, but we really appreciate your help and your support. And if you like what you saw tonight, join us. Our Facebook group is the Catskill Appalachian Research Collective. To report a sighting or to make a show suggestion, you can email us at carcgroup@gmail.com. Join us. Our next show will be Phil Poling coming up on April 6th. And we got Mike Merchant, who's the Snowwalker Prime, who we'll pick up We'll pick up Steven's commentary on the Expedition Bigfoot show coming up on April 20th. So be good, stay safe, and keep on squatching. And Bill, say good night, my friend. Good night from behind tall trees. If you enjoyed the previous program, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment.